unseen realms. I'm Marcus Quillum.
And I'm Jane Beaumont. Thanks for joining us today as we venture into a world that has captivated human imagination since our earliest days.
Today we're exploring a topic that's particularly close to my heart. Having grown up in rural Wales, where tales of the fair folk were whispered with equal parts reverence and caution.
We're diving into the enchanting and sometimes unsettling world of fairies and elemental beings. Are they simply colorful products of our collective imagination? Or could they represent something more? Something real that exists just beyond our ordinary perception?
It's a question that has persisted throughout human history, and one that we'll approach from multiple angles today, examining folklore traditions, notable encounters, and both scientific and spiritual perspectives.
I've been fascinated by fairy tales since childhood, but it wasn't until I began documenting folklore around the world that I realized just how universal these beliefs truly are.
Indeed. What's remarkable is that virtually every culture on Earth has some conception of nature spirits or fairy-like beings, despite having developed in isolation from one another. Consider this: from Greek nymphs to Japanese Kodama, Celtic Sidhe to Middle Eastern Jinn, these traditions share striking similarities.
That's fascinating because these beings often occupy a similar ecological and spiritual niche across cultures. They're typically associated with natural features, forests, mountains, rivers, the weather, and they serve as intermediaries between humans and the natural world.
And there's a fascinating duality present in most fairy traditions. The Celtic seed, for instance, could bestow tremendous blessings upon those who respected them. But they could also bring misfortune to those who gave offense. They weren't simply good or evil in the way we might categorize characters in modern entertainment. Consider this: the moral complexity of the Celtic seed is a reminder that their actions were not confined to simple binaries of right and wrong. They were a reflection of a complex world where respect and disregard carried significant consequences. Fascinating, isn't it? This nuanced understanding of fairy morality contrasts sharply with the often simplistic portrayals in contemporary media.
Right, they operated by their own mysterious rules and motivations that humans couldn't fully comprehend. I think that's actually quite reflective of our relationship with nature itself, both nurturing and dangerous, predictable in some ways, but ultimately beyond our control.
In Northern European traditions, we find household spirits like the Nisses or Tomtes, who would watch over farms and families. They expected small offerings, a bowl of milk or porridge, and in return, they'd ensure prosperity and protection. Fascinating, isn't it? This idea of reciprocity with the unseen world.
And then we have the Irish banshee, whose wail foretold death, not causing it, but simply announcing its inevitable arrival. These beings weren't just charming fantasy figures. They helped people make sense of life's mysteries and tragedies.
Now, I'd be remiss not to mention Paracelsus, the 16th century alchemist and physician who popularized the classification of elemental beings according to the 4 classical elements. This framework has been enormously influential in Western esoteric thought.
Can you break that down for our listeners who might not be familiar?
Of course. Paracelsus described 4 main categories: gnomes, the spirits of earth who guard minerals and underground treasures; undines, the ethereal water spirits associated with lakes and rivers; sylphs, the invisible beings of air; and salamanders, the powerful entities of fire.
I've always found it interesting how these classifications align with ecological niches. It's almost as if our ancestors were creating a taxonomy of consciousness within the natural world, assigning awareness and agency to the forces they encountered but couldn't fully explain.
That's a brilliant observation, Jane, and it reminds me of what we discussed in our episode on indigenous animism. This idea that consciousness isn't exclusive to humans, but permeates the entire natural world.
Exactly. And speaking of consciousness, let's move into some of the more compelling accounts of fairy encounters throughout history. These aren't just ancient legends. People continue to report experiences with these beings well into the modern era.
One cannot discuss fairy encounters without mentioning the famous Cottingley Fairies case from 1917. Two young cousins in Yorkshire, England, Francis Griffiths and Elsie Wright, produced a series of photographs, purportedly, thoughtful pause, showing them interacting with fairies in their garden.
What makes this case so remarkable is that it convinced Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the ultra-rational Sherlock Holmes, that fairies were real. He wrote passionate articles defending the photograph's authenticity.
Indeed. Though the girls later admitted in their elderly years that most of the photos were staged using paper cutouts, Frances maintained until her death that they had actually seen fairies and that one of the photographs was genuine. Fascinating, isn't it?
When I was researching in Ireland a few years ago, I interviewed an elderly woman in County Clare who maintained fairy traditions on her land. She showed me a gnarled hawthorn tree that she would never dream of cutting down. A fairy tree. She left offerings of milk and bread regularly, not out of superstition, she insisted, but out of respect for the good neighbors.
That practice has deep historical roots. Medieval and early modern accounts are filled with references to fairy encounters. What's particularly interesting is how matter-of-fact many of these accounts are. They weren't presented as fantastical tales, but as straightforward experiences, documented alongside mundane daily events.
I'd like to share a brief clip from my field recordings. This is Mary, a 73-year-old woman from Connemara, describing an experience she had as a young girl. I was about 7 years old, walking home from my cousin's house through the meadow. It was twilight, that in-between time. And there, just at the edge of the stone wall, I saw them dancing. Tiny lights at first, then clear as day, small people in green clothes. They didn't look at me, just kept to their dancing. I wasn't afraid, strangely. I knew not to disturb them. I never told anyone but my grandmother, who just nodded and said, "You've got the sight, child. Don't lose it."
What strikes me about accounts like Mary's is their consistency across cultures and time periods. The descriptions of fairy appearance, behavior, and the circumstances of encounters share remarkable similarities, often occurring at liminal times like dawn or dusk, in natural settings, and frequently to children or those in altered states of consciousness.
In more recent years, people have reported seeing unexplained orbs of light or shadow figures in forests and other natural settings. While these could certainly have conventional explanations, the witnesses often interpret them as manifestations of nature spirits or elemental beings.
This brings us to the crux of our discussion today. How do we make sense of these persistent accounts? Are there scientific explanations that might account for these experiences without dismissing them entirely?
Science offers several compelling perspectives. From a psychological standpoint, these experiences might represent projections of our collective unconscious, what Jung called archetypes, or they could result from pareidolia, our tendency to see meaningful patterns in ambiguous stimuli.
Neurological research suggests that certain states of consciousness, whether induced by meditation, sensory deprivation, or even particular environmental conditions, can produce vivid perceptual experiences that feel entirely real to the experiencer.
That's fascinating because it doesn't necessarily invalidate the experience. If our brains are capable of perceiving realities beyond our ordinary awareness, couldn't these altered states actually be revealing aspects of the world that normally remain hidden?
A provocative question, Jane. And it leads us to consider the limitations of the materialist paradigm. Quantum physics has revealed a universe far stranger than classical physics ever suggested, with particles that exist in multiple states simultaneously and seem to communicate instantaneously across vast distances. Fascinating, isn't it?
And we're learning that human perception captures only a tiny fraction of available information. We see a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum, hear a limited range of sound frequencies. Who's to say there aren't beings vibrating at frequencies just beyond our perceptual threshold?
Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy, provided extraordinarily detailed descriptions of elemental beings and their functions in nature. He didn't present them as metaphors, but as actual entities that could be perceived through developed spiritual faculties.
I visited a biodynamic farm in New Zealand where the farmers explicitly work with what they call nature intelligences. They don't necessarily see these beings visually, but they describe sensing their presence and cooperating with them to enhance soil fertility and plant health.
What I find most compelling is the middle path between literal belief and dismissive skepticism. The idea that these traditions might contain profound truths expressed through the language of myth and symbol.
Exactly. Whether or not fairies exist in a form we could photograph or measure, the concept of elemental beings carries important implications for how we relate to the natural world.
Consider this. If we perceived rivers, mountains, and forests as inhabited by conscious entities deserving of respect and reciprocity, would we be facing the same ecological crises we confront today?
That's such an important point. These beliefs fostered an attitude of reverence toward nature that we've largely lost in our modern, mechanistic worldview. There's a growing recognition that this disconnection might be at the root of our environmental predicament.
We're seeing a resurgence of interest in animistic worldviews, not just as quaint cultural artifacts, but as potentially vital perspectives for reimagining our relationship with the Earth.
And from a psychological standpoint, there's value in what we might call re-enchanting our relationship with nature. Studies show that people who experience awe and wonder in natural settings demonstrate greater environmental concern and well-being.
Jane, I'm curious. In all your years documenting folklore and unexplained phenomena, have you ever had an experience that you would interpret as an encounter with fairies or elemental beings?
That's a great question, Marcus. I've certainly had moments in ancient forests or beside remote waterfalls where I've felt a presence that's difficult to articulate. A sense that I wasn't alone, that I was being observed, or that the landscape itself was somehow aware. Were those fairy encounters? I can't say definitively, but they've left me with an enduring openness to possibilities beyond our ordinary understanding.
I think that's a beautiful way to approach this topic, with an openness to mystery without abandoning critical thinking. The world is far more wondrous and complex than we can fully comprehend, and there's value in maintaining that sense of possibility.
Whether fairies and elemental beings exist as independent entities or as profound metaphors for our relationship with the natural world, they remind us that reality may be far more magical than our conventional thinking allows.
As we draw our exploration to a close today, I'm reminded of what the Celtic traditions teach us, that the veil between worlds is thinnest at certain times and places, allowing glimpses of what normally remains hidden. Fascinating, isn't it? Consider this. These moments where the boundaries blur, where the veil between worlds becomes almost transparent. These are moments of wonder, where we may catch glimpses of what normally remains hidden.
And perhaps that's the invitation these traditions extend to us, to look more deeply, to listen more carefully, and to approach the natural world with reverence for its visible and invisible dimensions alike.
We'd love to hear from you, our realm explorers. Have you ever had an experience that felt like an encounter with fairies or elemental beings? Or do you have questions about the traditions we've discussed today?
Share your thoughts in the comment section of our website or join the conversation on our social media channels. Your experiences and perspectives enrich our exploration of these fascinating realms.
Next week, we'll be venturing into another mysterious territory with our episode on time slips and temporal anomalies, exploring accounts of people who claim to have briefly stepped into other time periods.
Until then, we invite you to pause for a moment the next time you're in a natural setting. Listen beyond the ordinary sounds, look beyond the visible forms, and perhaps, just perhaps, you might sense the presence of the elemental beings we've discussed today.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, we'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a review or subscribe to our podcast. Your support helps us continue bringing these explorations to curious minds everywhere.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. I'm Jane Beaumont.
And I'm Marcus Quillum. Keep exploring the unseen.